6. Things start cracking. 1973 was the first year where it became clear the economy was walking down a new path. The recession that began that year brought unemployment to the highest it had been ever since the 1930s. Inflation surged, but unlike the post war spikes, it stayed high. Short term interest rates hit 8% in 1973, up from 2.5% a decade earlier. And you have to put all of that in the context of how much fear there was between Vietnam, riots, and the assassinations of Martin Luther King and John and Bobby Kennedy. It got bleak. America dominated the world economy in the 2 decades after the war. Many of the largest countries had their manufacturing capacity bombed into rubble. But as the 1970s emerged, that changed. Japan was booming, China's economy was opening up, the Middle East was flexing its oil muscles. A combination of lucky economic advantages and a culture shared by the greatest generation, hardened by the depression and anchored in systematic cooperation from the war, shifted when baby boomers began coming of age. A new generation that had a different view of what's normal hit at the same time a lot of the economic tailwinds of the previous 2 decades ended. Everything in finance is data within the context of expectations. One of the biggest shifts of the last century happened when the economic winds began blowing in a different, uneven direction, but people's expectations were still rooted in a post-war culture of equality. Not necessarily equality of income, although there was that, but equality in lifestyle and consumption expectations. The idea that someone earning a 50th percentile income shouldn't live a life dramatically different than someone in the 80th or 90th percentile, and that someone in the 99th percentile lived a better life, but still a life that someone in the 50th percentile could comprehend. That's how America worked for most of the 1945 to 1980 period. It doesn't matter whether you think that's morally right or wrong, it just matters that it happened. Expectations always move slower than facts, and the economic facts of the years between the early 1970s through the early 2000s were that growth continued but became more uneven, yet people's expectations of how their lifestyle should compare to their peers did not change. 7. The boom resumes, but it's different than before. Ronald Reagan's 1984 Morning in America ad declared, "It's morning again in America. Today more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history." With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. That wasn't hyperbole. GDP growth was the highest it had been since the 1950s. By 1989, there were 6 million fewer unemployed Americans than there were 7 years before. The S&P 500 rose almost fourfold between 1982 and 1990. Total real GDP growth in the 1990s was roughly equal to that of the 1950s. 40% versus 42%. President Clinton boasted in his 2000 State of Union speech, "We begin the new century with over 200 million new jobs, the fastest economic growth in more than 30 years, the lowest unemployment rates in 30 years, the lowest poverty rates in 20 years, the lowest African American and Hispanic unemployment rates on record, the first back-to-back surpluses in 42 years, and next month America will achieve the longest period of economic growth in our entire history. We have built a new economy." His last sentence was important. It was a new economy. The biggest difference between the economy of the 1945 to 73 period and that of the 1982 to 2000 period was that the same amount of growth found its way into totally different pockets. You've probably heard these numbers, but they're worth rehearsing. The Atlantic rates. Between 1993 and 2012, the top 1% saw their incomes grow 86.1%, while the bottom 99% saw just 6.6% growth. Joseph Stiglitz in 2011, while the top 1% have seen their incomes rise 18% over the past decade, those in the middle have actually seen their incomes fall. For men with only high school degrees, the decline has been precipitous. 12% in the last quarter century alone. It was nearly the opposite of the flattening that occurred after the war. Why this happened is one of the nastiest debates in economics, stopped only by the debate over what we should do about it. Lucky for the purpose of this discussion, neither matters. All that matters is that sharp inequality became a force over the last 35 years, and it happened during a period where culturally, Americans held on to two ideas rooted in the post World War II economy: that you should have a lifestyle similar to most other Americans, and that taking on debt to finance that lifestyle is acceptable.